What do you think about when you think about Nebraska? Maybe it's the corn, maybe it's the Cornhuskers. But for me, it's the prairies. They're what make Nebraska such a unique area in our world, from the fertile soils to the stunning rolling hills and flatlands, and of course the different varieties of grass that come with it. Grass is such a vital portion of what drives many different types of ecosystem, as well as it being used to graze cattle. But what makes an area such a great place for grazing cattle, or an area used for wildlife? In order to figure that out, scientists have created different methods in order to test the quality of these areas. One of the most common methods used is the transect line. These lines are marked using the Geographic Information Systems, or GIS, and then tracked down in the field using the Global Positioning System, or GPS. After that, these lines are then clipped in order to test out the quality of the area, or they will be examined using another method. This last method is the use of the Robel poll and the creation of a species composition list. Now, before we start, what are transect lines? Transect lines are just imaginary lines placed in an area to get a feel for the vegetation type of that particular area. Because of how accurate it is, it has been used since the 1940s. A scientist from that time, R.H. Canfield, has stated that transect lines offer a practical, rapid, and statistically sound means for sampling vegetation on both large and small range areas. Now here we have a ranch type area, and we have dune tops on both sides with an interdunal area right here. Now we place transect lines on each of the dune tops and 2 lines in the interdunal area in order to get a feel for the vegetation in that area. Now that transect lines have been explained, we can now look at the different methods used on these lines. The method of clipping can determine the amount of forage in these areas, as well as the crude protein levels, to get a look at how nutritious the area is for herbivores. In most cases, this will be cattle. Clipping basically is cutting grass by hand. In this exhilarating method, grass is clipped in a frame and can be sorted into different groups, depending on the protocols of the experiment. A common sort seen is bifunctional group. Technicians will go out in the field and they will sort by either cool season grasses, warm season grasses, forbs, sedges, and there are many other types of sorts. These sorts can be quite lengthy, and depending on the type of sort and the frame used, the sampling of a single frame can take anywhere from 5 minutes to upwards of an hour. Finally, we will discuss the Robel polls and the species composition list, which is more geared towards looking at vegetation with the goal of making it better for wildlife. The Robel poll was created by the famous Dr. Robert J. Robel in 1970 in a paper looking to correlate vegetation types and greater prairie chicken habitat in Kansas. The Robel poll is used to measure vegetation height, and here is a Robel poll, or an example of one. And on it we have these different measurements. One just equals 1 decimeter, and we have 2 to 2 decimeters, and so on and so forth. So to use it, you place it in the ground and you go 5 meters away and you get to ground level and you look to see where the grass is. So if the grass is right here, that it's only covering half, you can bump it up to 2 decimeters. But if it's only covering around down here, it's still on that 1 decimeter line. This is instrumental when looking at habitats for different types of grassland birds and many other species to see what their preference for vegetation type and height is. Another method that is usually coupled with the Robel poll is the use of a species composition list. Doing this on transect lines gives scientists a general idea of the types of vegetation in the area, or vegetation species in the area, and which ones are the dominant species. This helps in determining if there's a problem species such as invasive species. One such species is Poa pratensis, otherwise commonly known as the Kentucky bluegrass. Plans can be put in motion to discourage the growth of these problem species in order to make room for more native species, like big blue stem and little blue stem. What is cool about this is that a change in the community can be seen over time after years of collecting this data on the species composition list to see if your action plan has had any effect on the community. In conclusion, I hope I have accurately explained the different methods of determining how forage quality is measured with transect lines and why that is important. First, we looked at using GIS and GPS in order to create the transect lines so we're able to get back to them for future clippings and species composition lists. Second, we looked at clipping and how we use it to determine the amount of vegetation in the area and how that affects the forage quality and the crude protein levels that are measured from the clipping. Finally, we looked at using the Robel polls and determining the species composition of the area and thank you.